Welcome to the launch of the Leader Impact podcast. We are a community of leaders dedicated to optimizing our personal, professional, and spiritual lives to have impact. This show is where we have a chance to listen and engage with leaders from around the world who are living this out. We love talking with leaders, so if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions to make this show even better, please let us know. Best way to stay connected is through our newsletter at leaderimpact.ca or social media at LeaderImpact. I'm your host, Lisa Peters, and our guest today is Roger Osbaldiston. Roger is passionate about developing leaders to grow personally, professionally, and spiritually. He is the Global Executive Director of LeaderImpact, leading a team with members in 350 cities around the world that hosts events and provides resources focused on leadership development. He formerly served as the Global Vice President for Campus Crusade for Christ International, with responsibility for ministries among leaders worldwide. Roger previously served as the Global Leader for the Tertiary Student Ministry of Cru, with over 8,000 staff in 170 cities. He enjoys speaking to emerging and current leaders about the significance they play in God's redeeming work in the world. Roger and his wife, Nikki, have been happily married since 1994, and their family includes 2 young men, Alex and William. Join us for some helpful tips, insights, conversations about developing a leader in your personal, professional, and spiritual life. All the way from Auckland, New Zealand. Welcome to the podcast, Roger.
Hey, hi, Lisa. It's great to be with you. Delighted to be on board. It's great that we can connect.
This is really exciting because this is the first podcast. I have to say, I'm probably a little nervous. I'm speaking to the big guy here. Well, not the biggest guy, but the big guy at LeaderImpact. So thank you for taking the time. We have a little bit of a time.
It's great to be able to be here. As you were sharing all those nice things about me, it's it really is a privilege to be a part of LeaderImpact and to be able to serve internationally and connect with leaders around the world. So yeah, delighted to join today.
Oh, I'm excited to kick off with you. So we're going to begin. I definitely just want to hear a little bit about yourself, prior to LeaderImpact.
Yeah, well, I could go back a long way. I was born at an early age, but I grew up in New Zealand. So as you know, New Zealand is a wonderful country to grow up in. So I spent most of my time in New Zealand. I did spend a year in Australia and then 6 years living in the US. Working with Campus Crusade globally, but have traveled extensively. One of my hobbies is I love to travel. Of course, the last couple of years that hasn't been the case, so I'm looking forward to being able to get out and about and travel a bit more. But I went to university in New Zealand and I studied politics and economics because I wanted to be the Prime Minister. That was kind of some of my early ambition. And so after I graduated, I went to work for the government as an economic policy analyst. And I really enjoyed that. But throughout that time, thinking about the future, I ended up leaving that and felt the call to go into nonprofit work. So went to work mostly in student ministry. So basically had held several roles in Campus Crusade, from local campus work right through to leading the ministry globally. And that was just a real privilege to connect with people from 170 countries. We had around 8,000 staff, as you said, working on campus around the world, seeking to help students become leaders and impact their countries. And so, that's sort of a bit of my background. Grew up a Kiwi, we like to say. So I should have greeted you with Kia ora, which is Māori, our local language. And so then I moved to LeaderImpact about 2.5 years ago. Finished my global role with Campus Crusade and transitioned into LeaderImpact about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, good. I had a career in nonprofit charity, and it was the greatest reward. And I still find that even today. I mean, I'm with LeaderImpact and a volunteer, but it just never leaves you. That the goodness you feel in your heart. So when you crossed over, I get that it's a good thing, working for a not-for-profit or a charity group.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's always good if we can bring our values together with our vocation and calling. I know that's not always possible for people. The economic realities and the marketplace. Sometimes we have to spend time working in areas that aren't our core passion. But I think it's ideal if we can get to a point where we're able to actually work in areas that are our prime areas of vocation or passion, and that's a privilege that I've had over the last several years.
All right. Well, one of my first questions was your career at Campus Crusade for Christ was focused on developing leaders. So, how has that prepared you for your position at Leader Impact?
Well, I've always been passionate about leaders and helping leaders grow and develop. As you know, our motto at Leader Impact is helping leaders grow professionally, personally, and spiritually for increasing impact. And so, that's kind of been with me most of my life. As I go back to really early on, I had a passion to come alongside students who, students really are the future leaders in every sector of our society. So, you look around the campus, every future prime minister, business leader, many of them are on the campus. So really investing in reaching students, I found, was a great way to impact that next generation. And so I think it's always been with me, that desire to come alongside leaders and help them grow. And, probably one of my greatest, joys in life is to see people grow, take on new challenges, take steps of faith, and take on greater areas of scope and responsibility. I think right now, today, the world needs more leaders and needs good leaders. I think this pandemic has created so much change and so much upheaval in so many industries. It's kind of revealed the good and the very worst of leaders and our capacity to do things and how we respond under pressure. So I think I don't think I'm overstating this, but I think perhaps never before have we needed good leaders to having a positive impact in every sector across society. I don't know if there's been a place in every country where leadership is required at the same time, to step up to the plate. I think there's been, major catastrophes around the world wars, and different things, but this has been truly a global phenomenon, and leaders have had to come to the fore and have had to step up, whether it's in politics or business, and making changes, making hard decisions. So I really believe that good leaders are in short supply, but they've probably never been needed as much as they are now. And so I think helping leaders grow personally, professionally, and spiritually is vital at this juncture. I have the privilege of being a part of a Leader Impact group here, and it's been fun just to kind of see the conversations and interaction between different leaders and how they're kind of coping and having that chance to process and talk through the changes that have gone on over the last couple of years.
And there have been a lot of changes in the last, many months due to COVID. A lot of young leaders are stepping up. So I'm really loving that. So I think my question goes there is, a lot of these young leaders are starting to step up, start their careers into positions of leadership. How would you suggest they best maximize their impact?
Right. Lisa, I think it's really important to be a good student of yourself and to, learn about yourself. And it's also good to learn about the world and what's happening in the world and be a good student of the world. And so I tend to have two thoughts when I think about emerging leaders and younger leaders starting out. So the first one is understand who you are. Think about who you are uniquely shaped to be. And I think it was Rick Warren, or maybe it'd been someone else before him, but came up with an acronym of SHAPE, SHAPE. And I've kind of stuck with that. And it takes a look at 5 different aspects of our lives and how we can understand each other in those. And so the S stands for spiritual gifts. If we're created by God, we have spiritual gifts that God has given to us. P is for personality. So we each have a different individual personality that grows and shapes over time. We have abilities, natural abilities. That's A. We have experiences. So I spelt that wrong, didn't I? H should have come before P. S-H-A. So spiritual gifts. H is for your heart. What are you passionate about? A is abilities. P is personality. And then E is your experiences throughout life. And I think as we kind of think about those as a bit of a resume, and I perhaps wouldn't put them on my resume, but I think about those things, becoming a student of who I am as a person, understanding my spiritual gifts, how God has gifted me. As I think about my heart, what am I passionate about? What's, really kind of tugs on my heart? And then my abilities, what am I kind of naturally gifted to be able to do, and abilities I've gained. The P, personality. So some of us are more extroverted, some are introverted, and our personalities shape some of the way that we can then think about our contribution to the world as leaders. But then also experiences. I think there's that big question, are leaders born or are they made? And I think most people would say it's probably both. We take some of the things that were naturally given to us in terms of our upbringing and our personality and all of those pieces. But then often we're forged in the reality of experience. That as we think about the different things we've had, that shapes us also as a leader, as a person. So I think the first thing I'd say is become a good student of yourself and think about what is your leadership resume and how have you been gifted and shaped so that you can then bring that to the world and what's going on in the world. And so the second thing I would say is be a good student of the world. Seek to understand how the world is functioning. I'm a person of faith, so I believe in God, and I believe that God has made everything and he is sovereign over everything, and that he also has a plan for the world and plans that he is enacting in the world. So becoming a student of what's going on and what is God doing in the world around us. And then, I don't know if you remember that kid's toy. It had like round ball. It has the shapes and the places where you can put. Do you remember that toy?
Yes.
And so I kind of tend to think of it this way: that God has created a world, and there's a whole world of opportunities, and there are lots of different shapes and places where we can plug in. But then we need to look at our individual shape and think, how are we growing as leaders, and how are we being shaped, and then finding the place that we can best plug in. I think the place where we can, I think it was Socrates, I could be wrong on that, who said, where your vocation meets the need in the world, or when your abilities meet a need in the world, there you've found your vocation. And so in a sense, where your shape meets a need in the world, and you can engage in what's happening in the world, that's going to be like a sweet spot. And so, I think for young leaders starting out, be a good student of yourself and be thinking about your shape, how you are being uniquely made and developed as a leader, and take opportunities to continue to develop those things and grow. But then also be a good student of the world and ask questions. What is God doing in the world? Where is an opportunity that I am best shaped for impact?
Yeah.
Couple of thoughts.
Yeah, those are awesome. And I think, and that's why I keep showing up here to the Leader Impact podcast. Well, number one, because I'm hosting it. But I think of who I'm surrounding myself with. And I have to do that. And this makes me happy is just being here with people like yourselves. But I continue to do that in everything I do in my work life. And I surround myself with people that help me grow. So I think I don't know. I think that maximizes my impact, but I just
I tend to think all of us have got a calling or vocation in our lives that I think is divine and God given, but we express that in different ways at different times. So you are probably gifted in communication and connecting with people. And so this right now, doing a podcast is one way of doing that, but there's probably other ways that you could also, do that, whether you were teaching or speaking somewhere or leading. You bring your core vocation to that particular job at the time. And so I don't think it matters so much if you're not in the perfect job. As you go through a career, there'll be jobs that are more enjoyable or less of a fit at times. And so what key, I think, is trying to get to grips with what is that underlying like vocation or calling, and then look for ways to express that. So I think about someone who's maybe a teacher at heart. Their heart and their giftings are able to teach others. Now they can express that, sure, as a teacher, which is fantastic. But also if they are working in business, they can also use their teaching gift to teach others in the business and engage them, if that makes some sense.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of tracking with what is that kind of thread in your life that picks up your kind of calling, vocation, your gifting, and look for ways to then express that and engage that in the world. And sometimes that'll be paid roles, sometimes it's non-profit volunteer work.
And sometimes it takes a long time to find that.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, right now I can see a lot of young leaders jumping in, ready to take on the world and possibly getting out of balance. Just maybe the priorities get a little confused between their personal, professional, spiritual. So my question is, we get caught up in goals and money, and the question is, what happens when life happens, and how do we balance out and correct the deficits? Because it
I
happens.
agree. There's definitely a lot of distractions, temptations, opportunities that kind of drag us aside. I think the first thing I'd say on that is mistakes aren't usually fatal. We all make mistakes, and failure is actually an essential part of leadership development and growth. Is if we're not failing, we're probably not trying enough things. So I'm not encouraging people to go out and make big mistakes and major failures, but we will experience failure, we'll experience mistakes, and I think a good point for that as you're young is don't panic. Most mistakes aren't fatal. They're not going to damage you for life. They're great experiences to learn from. I think it was Mark Twain who said, good judgment is the result of experience, and experience often comes from bad judgment. And I quite like that we often learn some of the best lessons in leadership and life through decisions or poor decisions that we've made. Obviously, it's better to learn from other people's mistakes, but often it's the ones that we make ourselves that teach us the most. So, I would say, there are a lot of distractions, a lot of temptations and things, but give yourself some grace and realize that mistakes aren't fatal, that failure is okay, from time to time to learn from and grow from. The failure would be not to grow from it, not to see it as a point of growth. But perhaps another thought on that is I'd probably add, keep good people around you. I think one of the temptations is to try and go and be successful independently, on your own, make it in this world. But I think for me, it's been about finding good people to surround yourself with. I heard that we tend to become like the closest 5 people in our lives. And so surrounding ourselves with the kind of people that we want to be like, that we want to, be more like, and who can help us grow to be the leaders that we need to be. So friends, colleagues, mentors. I've always had mentors in my life, right from an early age, just seeking out people who can counsel me, give ideas, give input, speak into my life. I think those sorts of things are vital, and we can kind of then learn from their experience and their mistakes, but in a constructive and sort of practical way. So I think, don't see mistakes along the way as fatal, but keep good people around you and keep learning from them, I think is, a key part of that. Probably also getting a sense of priority and how do priorities, get set in your life. One of the books we use in Leader Impact is called Essentialism. And it really focuses down on how do we strip out all of life to get down to the core essentials. He makes the point in the book that the word priority, we've kind of made it plural, priorities. But the word priority comes from a Latin word prior, which means one. And so the idea of having multiple priorities is possibly not the meaning of the word, but we've kind of expanded it because we want to think we can do a lot of things at once. Now, I think it's okay to have multiple priorities, but I think his point is a good one, that we can't actually do everything, all at once. I think early on in a leader's life is a good time to get experience, to try different things, engage in different ways that you can learn about yourself, but then get into a point where you actually begin to focus and get down to the essentials of what can you do really well and to focus on those things.
That is such a good book, Essentials. I think it's Greg McEwen. And so speaking of books, because, and I have read that one twice, probably could do it a third time, but I see books behind you.
Yeah.
And I'm loving because I see Braden Douglas's book, Become a Leader of Impact. But I want to ask you, because I see a few books, what is a book that changed your life? Or can you recommend any books on leadership, but more looking for something that changed your life?
Yeah. Well, a lot of books, I think. And I tend to think about authors actually. So, I have a number of authors that I think about, and I will read almost anything they write. So Henry Cloud is a favorite. So he's a psychologist, but he writes and does a lot of coaching and mentoring now with business leaders and in the marketplace. But I find his books just excellent. So Changes That Heal, 9 Things You Must Do, and Boundaries for Leaders, I think are just excellent. Anything by Stephen Covey is good. So one of the first books on kind of self-management and leadership I read for his was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's probably the starter point, in terms of my journey into leadership and self-understanding. Patrick Lencioni, just writes some great fables on leadership. So his 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is really a good one. Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last, Start With Why, really good books. And I really like a couple of guys, Chip and Dan Heath, who've written some books on change management, like Make It Stick, and another one my favorite one that I can't remember. But Chip and Dan Heath, anything they write. Probably my favorite book this year, as you mentioned, is probably Essentialism. I do have a copy or a few on my bookshelves there. We've just been through that in our Leader Impact group. And so that's probably the most impactful book in terms of practically thinking through how do I reorient my life and think about getting to the essentials of leadership and life. And so that's probably been one that's probably impacted me the most. If I had to pick one, I'd probably come to that one. But then I would also probably want to add the Bible. So, as a believer in God, I find I'm currently working through some Proverbs and Psalms, and the Proverbs are fantastic in terms of leadership advice, and then just watching the leadership examples, good and bad, of different characters through the Bible, and then, of course, Jesus himself. So that's probably my ultimate favorite book. But picking a leadership book from this century, I'd probably think Essentialism is an excellent choice.
Oh, great conversation. And it's funny, I'm reading Proverbs. We did a thing during the summer where we started on, I think, July 1st and read a proverb every day. And then we would meet once a week and go through it. It's such great stuff, like leadership. Such good conversations come from that. So you talked a little bit about change management, and I kind of want to go into that because it's just, when I think of change management, there's a lot of risk involved. And personally, are you a risk taker?
Well, I'm a bit of a mixture, I think. So I think from one side of my family, my mother's side, my grandfather was a bit of an entrepreneur. He planted a church. He was a businessman and a farmer, and a number of things that he was doing. He was always thinking about new things. He was a leader. And so I think for her side of the family, I've got some of that risk taking. But then my dad's side are more English and more conservative, and probably less risk taking. So I think I'm a bit of a mix. So I think I want to be a risk taker and step out and do things. But then I have this other conservative side of me that's kind of a bit cautious and, questioning some things. And I think maybe that's a good balance. Maybe that keeps me from jumping into things, kind of in a crazy way. The reality is anyone who was born in New Zealand as a relative of a pioneer who moved out here has got to have some risk, to pack up your life in another country and move across the world, completely the other side of the world for my family, coming from Europe to New Zealand. That's a big risk, and I think a lot of New Zealanders tend to have some of that pioneering, anything can be possible, we'll fix anything, a very pioneering kind of independent spirit. So a lot of New Zealanders have that kind of a personality or an approach to leadership. But I think personally I'm probably a bit of a mix between risk averse and risk taking. So I do like to take risks though, but it's perhaps just a little harder for me than others perhaps at times.
Yeah. Well, I think in the last many months, and I keep saying many because there's just COVID isn't done yet, there's been a lot of change and people are taking those risks and they're leaving their jobs. And I'm reading the articles and they're calling it the Great Resignation. People are making that change. They're like, I'm done. I'm ready. And I mean, I can feel it. So I don't know if you have any advice to give leaders who are, they want to take the risk or they want to make the change. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I think, it's good to be a student of the times. And, I felt this pressure through the pandemic because everything else is changing. I felt the pressure to want to change a whole lot of things. And in fact, we've sold a house and we're moving house. So, um, you know, you go through all this change, and so you want to change something. And we'll look back in a little while and see whether that's a good decision or not. But I think it's easy to fall into those kind of ideas. So I would say, it's good to hesitate and good to think, okay, everything in the world is changing. Does my job and my house or whatever need to change at the same time? Because, the more change there is, the more stress, that comes from that. Having said that, I've been reading about the Great Resignation and people taking this opportunity to move and change. And I would generally say, that's a good thing. That, there aren't many opportunities in life that come along where you have the capacity to be able to make a big change. And this pandemic and the changes that have come about have allowed a lot of people to do things perhaps that they weren't thinking about doing before. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't rush in to make change just because that might fix everything, because everything's changing, and it's like, oh, I need to change to try and get my life back together or whatever. But hesitate, think about it, and think, what are the unique things that are happening now that perhaps I can take advantage of and move into something different, or perhaps, people call it a big reset, to look at the way that we've been living our lives, maybe our priorities and values, and go back to the core, of some of those things. I often talk about 3 characteristics for leadership: passion, vision, and action. And I often will go back to those things. So a long time ago, I woke up about 3 a.m. in the morning, and these 3 words were in my head: passion, vision, and action. And I think I was writing a talk at the time, and so they might have been sort of in my subconscious. And so these three words came to my mind, and they've kind of been a bit of a mantra that I go back to when I'm needing to make big decisions or think about creating change. And so passion is the first one. And so it goes back to that, what I said about your heart and your core and what your vocation is. So it's about going back to your passion, what you're passionate about. So if there's an opportunity to change or resign and go to somewhere else, I'd be asking the question, how will that help me move more forward in what I'm passionate about? What are the passions that God has put on my heart? In terms of who God has shaped me to be and what He's doing in the world, is this connected to that? The second one would be vision. So I think it's good to cast your mind beyond this pandemic, think about the future. Where would we be in 5 to 10 years' time? I think vision is a real gift. It's the gift of seeing not how things are now, but how they could be in the future. It's seeing sort of beyond the problem now and see the potential for the future. It's not seeing the situation that we're facing, but what is the solutions that could be out there. And so start kind of opening your eyes and seeing with vision, what could the future be like and where could that provide an opportunity. And putting your passion and your vision together kind of could give you a bit of a dream or an idea of where you want to go forward. And then the last one, A, is for action. So this is often where I get stuck, is that action step. I mentioned about wanting to take risks, but a little bit risk averse and cautious. But it comes down to action and taking that step of action. I think we want to be bold, we want to be courageous, and take steps of faith. I've found in this pandemic time, I've had to rely upon less used skills and dig into some other areas. And so a lot of my skills, perhaps that I've relied upon in the past, strategic planning, thinking about, the future, doing 5-year plans, booking trips, all those things that perhaps I used to do and were part of my daily work, all changed. And so I'm needing to dig into other skill sets, but also think about different senses for thinking about where the world's going and what the world will be like in the future. So that's been a helpful kind of thing, is doing more listening to God, listening to people, rather than relying upon my, perhaps abilities that I would normally rely upon, like, oh, if I just plan this out for the next 5 years, this will happen. I think we need to, dig into some deeper skills, some deeper habits of thinking about the future as well. So yeah, passion, vision, action. I'd go back to those, I think, when it comes to, times of major change.
Yeah, I feel like at least Peters is having a leadership lesson here. I want to be writing notes. I'm like, this is good. This I need to write this down. So we talked a little bit. I mean, you've sort of mentioned it already, just the spiritual. So tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey.
Yeah, for me, I grew up with, I mentioned that my grandfather started a church, planted a church in our town in New Zealand. And so I grew up from an early age going to church and being a part of that whole community. And so my spiritual journey is rooted in the Christian faith. Um, and it wasn't until I began to go to university and began to think, I grew up in a small rural part of town and moved to a big city to study. And that was eye-opening for me in lots of ways. But, heading off to university, becoming an adult and stepping out of home and the comforts of that and growing up and then going to university was a pretty confusing time, thinking through what you've been taught, what you grew up believing and thinking. And so what I found at university was there were any number of competing voices or ideas about things. University is a great place to discuss and talk about the latest ideas on different things. And what I found that it was a confusing in one sense that I was able to explore and discover a whole lot of things about faith, but also a lot of professors and people who talk about different things. And so I came to the point, a bit of a crisis point in my own faith journey, where I had to, make a decision. Am I going to keep pursuing my Christian faith, or am I going to do something else? I came back to something. Someone said to me, you've got to rely upon the answers to the questions you know, not be always in doubt about the answers to questions you don't know. So there are things that, I knew growing up. There are things that I also couldn't question, answers to life's biggest issues that I don't question about faith and about God. I had a number of other questions still, but my grandfather was very significant in my life. And he said to me, if you wait till you know everything about something, you'll never do anything. And so I came to the point where, I got involved with Campus Crusade, a student group on campus, and they did a lot of lectures and seminars and things on things like the reliability and historicity of the Christian faith, the person of Jesus, the Bible. And I learned and dug into a lot of things like from Josh McDowell, who wrote a couple of books called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and presenting some of the perhaps historical evidence. So a lot of my faith growing up was, in a small environment, in a small church, and it was not quite as perhaps history or fact-based. It was a little more mysterious, I suppose. But getting involved with Campus Crusade and reading books by people like Josh McDowell and other scientists and people who had studied things really kind of helped balance out some of the things that I was hearing from other sectors. And so it really kind of gave me a grounding that there was solid historical evidence and reasons for the Christian faith, for Jesus as a person, and his resurrection. And so I wrestled with a number of things and came to the point that, yes, I still have some questions about other things, and I'll probably always have questions, but I realized that there were answers I had that I couldn't question. There were things that, I knew to be true as I'd examined the evidence, as I had experiences in my life, as I'd seen God, answer prayer and show up in my life, that there were things that I couldn't explain away any other way. And so while I was at university, I decided to put my trust in Christ, and I have never looked back since. Sure, there's been questions and times when I've doubted things or questioned things, but really since then, God, gave me a solid sense of purpose and direction, and I think a certainty and clarity about some of the core issues of faith and trust, and that's really stuck with me, ever since. Yep, there's been lots of times when it's been tested, and now as I get older, not that I'm that old, but as you kind of progress, you tend to, as I mentioned, think about things in slightly different ways. And so, I try and listen for what God is saying in different ways now than maybe I would have done when I was, a university student. But it's been a great journey and adventure of, following God and following Jesus through that.
Yeah, I think that's what I love most about Leader Impact groups is just the people in the group, there's so many different levels. Some are just spiritual seekers, and some are so much stronger. And I know when I first joined, and it was 2015, so it was a long time ago. I've just grown so much by surrounding myself, as you're saying. You had crew, and you surrounding yourself. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about your Leader Impact group in Auckland. What have you been doing in your group?
Yeah, well, we have a great group. A number of different sectors, different roles. We've got directors of insurance company. We've got chief technical officer. He's more technical, being a CEO of a fintech company. We've got someone who's involved with TV analytics. Someone who's works for Air New Zealand, a leadership role there. And obviously, that's been a lot of change for him over the last year. HR, non-profit leadership, just bank, finance industry. So we've got a great group. And what's been really, really good about the group. So yes, there's been great content, and we've worked through a number of books over the last year or two. But one of the best things has been just the conversation and getting to get that time to connect together. And I think during this time of the pandemic, we've been meeting online, so we couldn't meet face to face. And my city, Auckland, has terrible traffic. So the idea of getting together for a meeting in the morning or the afternoon or evening is kind of challenging. So we do that occasionally when we can. It's been challenging with different restrictions, but we'll get together for a meal or a social gathering where it's no content. We're just connecting and getting to know each other. But the group time every week is online. So we meet online, and we've worked through several books. We worked through Essentialism, Becoming a Leader Impact from Braden Douglas, the Foundations study, which is a fantastic study looking at your values and mission in life and some of those things that we've talked about today. Right now, we're just finishing up Henry Cloud's Boundaries for Leaders, which has been a fabulous book, actually. A number have said that it's been one of the most practical in terms of putting those things into place about leadership, building trust in your teams. So I would say it's been a mixture of great content, and Leader Impact puts together some great study reviews and the Integrated Life series, which the study guides on some of these books. So it seeks to kind of pull out some of the personal, professional, and spiritual questions and discussions around those books, because the different books have different angles and author has a different perspective each time. But the Leader Impact study guides really help kind of bring out some of those extra conversations. So we've been using that, and the content's great, but I would say, equal to that is the relationships, the connection, the ability to grow together and hear, hey, we're in this journey together. We're going through some similar things at times, and just appreciating that piece. And I think for a lot of leaders, just this morning we had a Leader Impact group, and we were discussing a couple of items that come up in the news. A CEO who's having to step down from a major company, failing. They're citing culture failures within the company, and really stems back to the leadership style of the CEO. And so we're discussing Henry Cloud's book on Boundaries for Leaders, and he's talking about CEOs who don't listen, who aren't able to listen and take input, and how that affects the culture of the organization. And so we can see the things that we're talking about in our group just playing out, not only in our group, but in our country as a whole, and seeing those things. So it's been a fantastic group. And I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, Lisa, for the purposes of Leader Impact podcast, I've done a lot of courses. I've done a lot of things over the years, but I would say this group has probably helped me grow as a leader more than anything else that I've been involved with. And I think it's because of the relationships, and being alongside a peer group of leaders and discussing things, in addition to the content that we've been going through. So I think that combo is really powerful combo.
Yeah, I would agree. Once I started attending, when I got involved in the group, I don't think I ever missed a Wednesday morning. Right. I just love it. It's 1 hour of my morning, and it sets it off right. So right in there with you. So, you may have answered this, but I just want to sort of shift the focus more to the young leaders, because, you're mentioning CEOs and VPs, but we've got some young leaders coming up, and I just want to ask you, how would they benefit by joining Leader Impact?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, well, we identified that a lot of our resources were aimed at senior leaders in the marketplace. I also come from a background working in student work, and the future leaders of every part of society are coming through campus. And so for Leader Impact, we began a new initiative in the last year called LeaderImpact NEXT. And LeaderImpact NEXT is really going for those early career leaders who are coming through but have got strong leadership potential. And so we've tailored a set of resources and coaching, how we can start up groups in cities for leaders coming through in the next generation, or leaders who are early in their leadership career. And so we put together a curation of resources and ways that those groups can lead. And so Leader Impact Next groups, are often part of a Leader Impact city-wide movement, but they're made up of younger leaders, and there are some specific resources that can help. So Foundations is one that we use across all of our groups, but just as it's useful for senior leaders, it's actually really, really helpful for younger leaders and emerging leaders, because it really gets to, at the very start of your career, what are your values? What is your mission in life? What's your vision? Setting some goals and plans in those directions. So I would say Foundations is, as the title would say, is foundational. And so it's a really great place to start. So we've had a couple of groups here in Auckland start with young professionals looking at the Foundations group. I think that's a great place to start. Another resource that we're just launching in the next year is called Venture. And Venture is about, how do you go beyond just some of the regular conversations that we have to actually step into some of the spiritual conversations? So in Leader Impact, we want to grow personally, professionally, but also spiritually. And that means getting into spiritual conversations with each other. And so the Venture series looks at how to bring in the spiritual conversation. Because, the old saying, you never talk about politics, religion, or sex, or is it politics, religion, or something like that anyway. But, so talking about religion is, or spirituality can be a difficult topic. And so Venture is providing some help and encouragement of how we can actually, just begin spiritual conversation, engage at the spiritual level. And I think that is a great resource for younger leaders jumping into the workplace at an early stage. Because, I mentioned my experience at university. It's a great place to throw ideas around. You do talk about everything. You do talk about religion and different philosophies and things like that. And then suddenly you get to the workplace and you're expected to know everything. You're expected to kind of be, now delivering and performing and things. But really you're still just kind of learning. And I think on the spiritual side, we're used to being open conversation about things, but you come into the workplace environment and now you're paid to be focusing on a task and you're working. Your time is not as free as it was when you were a student. And so you can't just, function in exactly the same way at work and having conversations about a number of things. So Venture is just a way of kind of helping anyone at any stage, but I think it's particularly relevant for younger leaders coming into the marketplaces. How do you actually find opportunities and places where you can speak spiritually about issues with people, as people in the work, in your team are talking about their lives? Is there a way that you can help bring a spiritual perspective to that as well? So I think Venture is a fantastic resource as well. Plus, a number of the Integrated Life series I think are really helpful. But the next team has also begun to put together a bit of a process of how someone could begin a group in a city. So there's a lot of places where there aren't Leader Impact groups. You mentioned we're in many cities around the world, but there are a lot of places where we're not. So we're also putting some resources together where people can start a new group. And so particularly in the next area, we're putting together a bit of a process of how do you start a group that maybe is more appealing to the emerging leader generation, which involves perhaps a different set of social activities or engagements or ways of engaging than perhaps someone at my stage would want to engage. So we're just sort of tailoring a process that's relevant to that point.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's some thoughts.
Good. And you know what? I love when you're meeting online, and I think of all the groups that due to COVID, they did have to move online. And I'm going to be starting a new group. Braden's book is going to be our first one, but now I'm thinking it should have been Foundations. But we've got people from all over my province,
right?
Because Zoom allows that. And there was no Leader Impact in their small town, so they're going to join into ours. So I really think that's a great idea. So I only have two questions. I'm going to get a little deep on this one. Leader Impact is dedicated to leaders having a lasting impact. So as you continue to move through your own journey, have you considered what you want your faith legacy to be when you leave this world?
That is a deep question, Lisa.
Deep moments.
I know it's an often asked question, what do you want to be said about you when you die or whatever. Um, I think two things for me, and I think this may be true for leaders. So on a personal level, I would like to think that I've helped people grow. I really own the mission of Leader Impact and, wanting to help people grow personally, professionally, and spiritually. But I'd like to think that I'd help people grow or go one step further in their journey in life and in leadership. I really love, one of my sweet spots, I think, is just mentoring people. So I love to mentor and engage and come alongside younger leaders. And there's nothing that gives me greater joy than seeing leaders grow and take that next step of faith, a next step in their career or their journey, and have the skills and courage to do that. Often I think people want to make those steps, but they lack perhaps someone to come alongside and just give a little push, give a little help and say, yeah, go for it. So I want to be known to have been someone who's come alongside people and helped them grow and take the next step in their journey, and particularly towards making a positive impact. So, we don't want to just have leaders that are out there for themselves. There are plenty of examples of bad leaders. So I want to see people who are having a positive impact, and particularly also for God's kingdom. So, I mentioned before that, God's created a world of opportunities for us. And so I want to help leaders grow so that they can really have a positive impact on the world around them and contributing in a way that God would want us to help shape the world and for his kingdom and for the future. So I think that's what I'd like to be, known for as I look back and think about a legacy, would be helping people grow towards God and his purposes. But there's another piece that I've thought about more as I've got older as well, is the important role of organizations and institutions. We think of that a little bit boring, really, but I think one of the legacies we can often leave is helping shape an organization or an institution or a place that will continue after us. So I think about my grandfather, actually, who planted a church, and so for generations after he's gone, that church can continue to help people as they, journey forward. Now, not everything should stay the same and things should change, and not everything, works out the way that we plan. But, organizations like Leader Impact, I'm pleased to invest in Leader Impact because I'm hoping that long after I've left Leader Impact, that it would be continuing to help leaders grow, and there would be new leaders that would be engaging. But sometimes as leaders, we need to come along and help provide the infrastructure, the framework, the parts that kind of keep that moving on. And so I think society needs great companies. We need great organizations. We need great churches. We need great movements that leaders, are leading now that will last on beyond them. So I guess I answered that question in two ways. One is like the personal legacy of, seeing people grow personally as leaders. But I think also it's our responsibility as leaders to create culture elements in society that are part of our civil society that will live on after us. I don't mean the sense of like, creating a building with your name on it and a legacy and, an institution in that sense. But being a part of organizations and companies and pieces that actually can continue to grow and adapt as the needs will be different in the future. So not something that's, stuck in now, but organizations that, continue on to the future. I think that's an important part of our legacy, is building, learning and growing organizations.
I think that's a great faith legacy to leave, Roger. So my last question for you is, what brings you the greatest joy?
Well, that's a hard question. I've mentioned a couple of times, probably one of my greatest joys is seeing people grow and change and take the next steps of faith in their journey as a person and as a leader. So that's probably true, at the deepest level. It's also true in my family. So, one of my greatest joys is seeing my sons grow and develop, seeing my wife, flourish. She stepped out this last year or two and started a business in marketing and photography. And so I love seeing her do that. My sons are quite entrepreneurial, so have desires to start a business. They start different things. They've got a bit of a following on Instagram and have desire to, set up different companies and things. And I'd love to see that kind of happen. So I'm excited about that. I have a lot of other things that bring me joy. I love coffee. I love cheese. I love travel and meet, going to new cultures. So all those things bring me joy as well. But I think at the deeper level, it's seeing people I love, family, friends, colleagues, and people around me, as well as, leaders in general society, growing, changing, and making a positive impact.
Perfect way to end. Thank you, Roger. That was wonderful. And just thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. We just love it.
Yeah, as we say in New Zealand, no worries.
No worries. I honestly feel like this is like, I wished I was writing more notes. I'm going to have to listen to this so I can write down all the books. I feel like it was a leadership lesson for me, and I'm sure everyone listening. I absolutely love being a part of this podcast just for this reason, is just to hear other stories and, the books you're reading and what's going on. And you really had some great stuff. So thank you for just sharing.
Thank you, Lisa, because I think, it's about leaders sharing their journey, and you're helping do that. You're helping, leaders like me kind of start to think about some of these things and crystallize it and be able to share it as you ask really great questions. So thanks for contributing in this way. It really helps, I think, the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Roger. All right. Well, that is it. A few more notes. Leader Impact is a global movement dedicated to leaders having a lasting impact. And we believe that true impact occurs when your personal, professional, and spiritual life is fully engaged. We have a network in over 350 cities around the globe, and we host live and virtual events throughout the year and have a growing network of peer groups that meet weekly across these cities. Our podcast is just one of the ways to help you accelerate your growth as a leader. So we hope you enjoyed meeting Roger Osbaldiston today. You can find him at rogerosbaldiston.com. So if you're part of Leader Impact, you can always discuss or share this wisdom with this group. And if you are not yet in Leader Impact group, we would love to have you. So check out our groups available in your area at leaderimpact.ca or get in touch with us and we will connect you. Stay in touch with our newsletter at leaderimpact.ca or on social media. And remember, impact starts with you.